Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 8th of February 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, of course, Mike Robinson. Mike, child abuse was very much in the news yesterday. We couldn't cover it, but we'll bring it up on screen today. Here is the Mail. A very, very long, very detailed article around Nick the Fantasist. Gentlemen stand trial for paedophile offences, how the man who sparked disastrous VIP child sex abuse probe had the police, BBC and Labour's deputy leader lapping up his lies. So this is an incredible piece of journalism. On one hand, you can say that they've gone out to utterly try and destroy this man who dared to speak up about what he said happened regarding his own abuse and the abuse of other children. Or you could say that they've put so much, so much detail into this article that even the Daily Mail is trying to bring some of the discussion points to the surface. Now, I know many people will probably disagree with that line that I've just put across, but I'm going to say it's becoming increasingly clear that journalists for some of the biggest titles do not believe what they are being told through the system, through the government system. So please read this article. I think it's important to read it and consider what is actually happening here. But Nick the Fantasist, he's a fantasist apparently, Mike. He did give evidence to the police about Ted Heath. What's happened to that evidence?
Oh, well, it's gone missing, of course. The Times reporting that the Met Police lost 2 interviews with Nick about Edward Heath. They say that Scotland Yard is unable to locate some of its interviews. This is the interviews that detectives conducted with the alleged fantasist. So again, we're reiterating this point, who prompted the VIP child abuse inquiries. The detectives say, however, that Nick's evidence against Heath was credible and true, although they've lost it. So it's a bit unfortunate. 2 excerpts relating to abuse claims that Nick made are the ones that have gone missing, particularly with regard to Edward Heath. So this seems to me designed to discredit the whole Operation Midland business. And I mean, I take your point about the Daily Mail and the amount of information that there is in that article. But unfortunately, 90% of people won't get past the headline, and that's what's going to be implanted in their minds.
That's absolutely true, Mike. If you feel you'd like some sort of comeback on the Daily Mail, one of the things that we're increasingly going to say is get on to the Twitter page and reply to tweets which the Mail have put out themselves. That way you can post in front of all their readers or all their Twitter followers at least, and you can start to ask the questions that unfortunately we haven't got time to do. But just an amazing coincidence that as Nick is to be vilified in the courts on a variety of charges, key evidence that he gave against former Prime Minister Ted Heath just lost. It was probably just an accident, Mike, I would say. Yeah.
Same happens with the Dickens dossier, didn't it?
Dickens dossier lost as well, yeah. But it's just unfortunate. Well, we're bringing this headline to brighten things up again. A big thank you from ex-Met Detective John Wedger. And John has been delighted that since we've been mentioning his appeal to help him walk from London to Manchester to raise the issue of child abuse, the total's gone up now from just a bit over, well, it was 1,250 on the 6th. We're up to 2,560.
Good stuff.
And he needs £5,000 to do that walk. We need to support him because we need that walk to happen. And let's remind ourselves that as the vilification of Nick the Fantasist takes place, we have John Wedger himself on audio, on video, saying that when he stepped forward to warn about the grooming, abuse and murder of children in London, far from getting support and rewarded for his diligence and bravery, he was hounded, bullied, threatened by the Metropolitan Police, had his pay stopped, put on half pay. This was while his son was lying unconscious in hospital as a result of a serious accident. And of course, John had no support from the Home Office. He had no support from Theresa May. He had no real support for any MP or charity or child abuse or children's homes organisations whatsoever. So Policeman steps forward to say that the British government, MPs, charities, local authorities were covering up the abuse of children in London. He's vilified, has his pay stopped, put in the gutter and kicked. Probably it's all just fantasy.
Must be. Well, let's stay on the subject of fantasy because we're moving on to Brexit, and that, of course, is fantasy. Theresa May saying today that MPs will get to see the whole package before they vote on it, which is quite strange because only a few weeks ago Philip Hammond said Parliament will not get to see the full details of the deal with the EU before they get to vote on it. So I'm not quite sure what's going on. Brian, the more this goes on, the more clear it is to me. We've got the issue of the movement of people from job to job within Theresa May's cabinet. There's no stability. There's utter chaos. We've got Theresa May saying different things to Philip Hammond, who's saying different things to Boris Johnson. Clearly, we are heading to stay in the European Union at this point.
Yeah, but I think we've got to separate. There's chaos in Westminster. As far as the politicians concerned, there's chaos. But where the policy is being formed is around Westminster. Cabinet Office certainly involved in it, civil service. But then we're going to move into these non-government organisations that are driving the direction of policy. So the pro-EU policy being pushed extremely hard. Most of the backbench MPs haven't got a clue as to what's really going on in Westminster. And perhaps this is the time to bring in this Guardian headline, some ways quite remarkable. George Soros Foundation backs the campaign to reverse Brexit. And it says that US business magnate has given $400,000 to Best for Britain Group since June 2007 election. And then we have an article with some detail, but I'm going to say, Mike, that either the young journalist, Jessica Elgott, has been a bit slack here because she's missed a lot of detail out, or else she's done it deliberately and it's coming close to fake news. I did notice that she's got her born date as January 08, which would make her 10 roughly.
Well, it's quite
so
possible.
We'll let her,
anything's possible in the media these days, Brian.
We'll let her off for being a youngster. You might not be able to make it out on the image on screen there, but we've got her Twitter page up with her article on George Soros, and under it is a little comment from myself pointing out that she's missed a lot of detail. So what's the key thing? Well, really, we've got George Soros, who is not just putting $400,000 into what he's doing. He has had nearly $2 billion over recent years going into what he's doing. And here we can see quite clearly that he is championing democracy, except when people don't choose his particular politics. So if you're one of the 17 million who voted you wanted to come out of the European Union, you might have thought that was a democratic process, but not according to George Soros, because he doesn't like what you voted for, and therefore he's working under the surface, many would say in a very subversive way, to overturn that leave vote. So this is the organisation that they were talking about, Best for Britain. And I'm going to say to you, we went in, as we always do, to have a look at the people and who they are. So here's some of their key team. We've got the board members, and I'll just read the names for our listeners. We've got Clive Chowdhury, we've got Shaks Ghosh, Anatoly Kaletsky, we've got Peter Norris, Stephen Peel, and Eloise Todd. Now, what I did is what we always do, which is actually just go and have a look for them. So if we start off with Shaks Ghosh in the centre there, we find that she's actually involved also with the Claw Social Leadership Organisation. If you don't know what that is, this is common purpose on steroids, just astonishing, selecting, choosing, reframing individuals to be future leaders in government positions or civil service positions, not only in this country, worldwide. We've got Clive Chowdhury there, Resolution Foundation. And if you look at his background, it's into really heavyweight insurance, the Pearl Insurance Company, General Electric. So he's a big businessman in the insurance model, but apparently he's got Britain's democratic process best at heart. We've got Stephen Peel, Novalpina Capital. So this is a hedge fund, yeah. I would guess. So we've got more sort of banking hedge fund interests. We'll go up to the top. We've got a Russian political journalist, Anatoly Koletsky. I was really horrified when I saw that, Mike, because he's a Russian, so surely the government is out to wheedle him out pretty quickly.
Apparently not.
Apparently not, no. So we've got a Russian political journalist now helping democracy in UK. That all sounds good. We've got Peter Norris. Well, I didn't have to go far to find him because he's a big Virgin man, and his background is in Barings Bank and Goldman Sachs. Oh,
Barings Bank ended well.
Minor detail, a bit like the evidence against Ted Heath.
Yes.
We'll just push it under the carpet. Minor detail. We've got Eloise Todd, the Chief Executive Officer, and quickly found that she was involved with another massive social change organisation called Open Government Partnership. And it says, from commitment to action, OGP was launched in 2011 to provide an international platform for domestic reformers committed to making their governments more open, accountable and responsive to citizens. So when 17 million citizens vote to leave the European Union, this organisation works to overturn that.
Yes. Somebody you don't have on the list there is Mark Malloch-Brown, Lord Malloch-Brown, of course, big Tony Blair stooge.
Well, it's very interesting you say that, Mike, because of course his name is in the press in relation to this donation. His name is in The Guardian in relation to this donation. The one place I couldn't find his name was actually on the Best for Britain website.
Well, he was on BBC Radio 4 this morning promoting that organisation, that he was so delighted to receive this funding from George Soros.
Okay, right, so we've added him in. Here's the Russian at work, and he comes out with a great lie in a Guardian article. There's no connection really between him and the Guardian apart from the articles he writes. Blair is right on Brexit. Parliament must have a democratic debate. We must restore the principle of parliamentary sovereignty. Theresa May does not have an open-ended mandate. So there's the great lie. Parliament is sovereign, and the Guardian is printing the view of a Russian, shock horror, political journalist.
Yes, Malloch-Brown was saying this on the radio this morning as well, that we live in a parliamentary democracy. But of course we don't. We live in a constitutional monarchy.
Yeah.
They need to get some understanding of the Constitution here.
I think they understand, Mike. I think the aim is to pull the wool over the public's eyes as much as possible, but we're going to do our best to stop that. So let's move on through the rogues gallery. Here she is. It's Shax Ghosh. Don't know whether she's related to Helen Ghosh, who was closely involved with Common Purpose and DEFRA, but there we are. So here we've got the CLAW Social Leadership Organisation. We develop leaders with a social purpose so that they can transform their communities, organisations and the world around them. We help make social change happen by supporting and investing in people and enabling them to become leaders with the resilience, self-awareness and capabilities to tackle the social challenges of the 21st century. It's we, and let's have a look at some people who are involved with CLAW. This man interested me a lot. Obviously, CLAW is independent, Mike.
Of course it is.
I'd like you to understand that.
Yeah.
So here we've got Mark Fisher, He's been the director of the Office for Civil Society in the Government Innovation Group since October 2014. His main responsibilities are to support the government's ambitions for volunteering, for philanthropy and social investment, to support the general development of the voluntary and community sector, and to grow the national citizen service for young people. So we find the government is at work in what we'll call a back door in this organisation to use young people in particular to drive the change the government wants.
Yes.
This is duplicitous, Mike.
In an independent way, though?
Oh, in an independent way.
Yeah.
So £1 million, I think, came into them last year, which I've labelled there. Of course, that is independent dependence.
Absolutely.
If you're interested, and you should be, go and have a look at who the supporters are. Have a look at where this money comes from. The Barrow Cadbury Trust, the Big Lottery Fund, the Gulbenkian Foundation. I know at least one of our viewers will be onto that one. Very, very interesting organisation, which I think goes back to Turkey, if I remember correctly. Claude Duffield, another very potent one to have a look at. Claude Leadership, well, we're mentioning that. Esme Fairburn, this is another one. Forces in the Mind Trust, I'll come on to. Friends Provident, Pears Foundation. If you use Pear soap, I don't know whether you do, but that's what you're dealing with, Mike.
Right.
Okay. Rank Foundation, Royal Society for the Arts, and the Tudor Trust. If you don't know who these organisations are, you need to, because these are the people really driving political policy in the UK. So let's just have a look at this one, Forces in Mind Trust. What are they about? Well, we shouldn't worry, because these people, sorry, there's an image over the top there. The Forces in Mind Trust are a charity that are helping forces people to get themselves into society. And if you look at who their supporters are, you've also got the Rand Europe coming in, one of their gentlemen. I don't know whether, yeah, unfortunately, I've got those in the wrong order. But the gentleman whose face you can see, hands, connected with Rand Europe, and they are now working in that Forces charity to help our veterans re-establish themselves in society. So apologies for that, but you can see how the web follows through. And here's Eloise. She was connected into the Open Government Partnership, and you can then follow it through. This is what they say about themselves: Open Government, from commitment to action. OGP launched in 2011 to provide an international platform for, quote, domestic reformers committed to making their governments more open, accountable and responsive to citizens. You see the picture now?
Yeah.
It's all good stuff. And if you want to know who you should write to, if you wonder who is running this outfit, you've got Thea Sulkiani, who's the Minister of Justice for the government of Georgia. That's a good start, I think.
Okay.
We've got Scott Bryson, President of the Treasury Board, Government of Canada. Mukilani Dimba, Head of Development, the International School for Transparency. That sounds like something out of Harry Potter. I think you'd probably get there from platform 3.5, Mike. And we've got Nathaniel Heller, the Executive Vice President for Integrated Strategy Results for Development. So we've got Best for Britain connected through this lady to this little one. Where are they based? Well, this is where it gets interesting, because they're actually based in Washington. And in the Guardian article originally, they are pointing out connections through to Obama's campaign team with this little cesspit, or snake's wedding, as I like to call it. Now, note that under the address, you've got a project of the Tide Centre. So we can now go in a bit deeper. Here's the Tides approach, and what are they up to? We accelerate the pace of social change with dynamic tools, deep experience, novel collaborations, and innovative ideas. And this is really, I'm going to call it subversive, because if you look at what they're doing in this network, traditional government, wherever it is being superseded by this hidden network of advisors and people.
Nowhere to be seen. And just looking at what it says at the top there, we bring unlikely partners together. This is absolute common purpose speak, operating outside your silos, breaking through your silos, all this kind of leadership
Yes.
change agent speech is right here in front of us.
So Common Purpose as an organisation is still visible, Mike, but it has diluted to a certain extent. And the reason for that is that the Common Purpose agenda is now being driven through this myriad of other organisations, none of which could exist without big money funding them. So when we see the bankers sitting at various levels of chairmanship or board of trustees or executives, this is the mix. You've got big banks, big money, driving policy for social change.
I mean, it seems to me that when, and I say that because I believe it is going to happen, when we have the second referendum on whether we stay or go with regard to the European Union, this is the information that should be being discussed, not a rehash of what happened at the last referendum.
No. And of course, Mullock Brown is boasting that he's going to be going around helping to reframe people to get the right answer this time. Where does this head? I've just brought this one in. We could go in a bit deeper, but you start to come up against organisations for this, Uniting for Peace. It looks good, it sounds good, but when you actually look at what they're doing, they are helping to install world government by saying we've got to break apart all of the nation states and their military.
Yeah. Well, speaking of military, I just wanted to push this one in because Veterans for Britain today pushed out a useful tweet. Unfortunately, I've covered the EU flag with the tweet itself, but they're saying with regard to Brexit, the EU Commission has made a song and dance about moving these EU agencies out of the UK, and they list the Space Data Centre, the Medicines Agency, the Banking Authority, and they say it's odd then that they've said nothing about relocating the military HQ, and here they've got an image of, I guess, Northwood there, Brian, and the multinational headquarters.
I think actually that's EU NAVFOR headquarters, because I think I've seen that background before. Right. I think it's there.
But their point is well made nonetheless.
Absolutely. So perhaps Veterans for Britain are starting to move in the right direction, but of course remember that they're heavily in bed with the Tory party itself, so it's difficult for them to criticise the government because of those close associations with the Conservative Party.
Now, many of the mainstream papers have been commenting on the British Army recruitment video that has been doing the rounds. And the first thing to say about it, Brian, is it is extremely dark in its sort of basic feel. But the focus here is that we've got 3 or 4 members of a military team here who are sitting waiting for a Muslim soldier, member of their team, while he prays.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that this is, first of all, it's not a very attractive ad in the sense that it isn't going to encourage people to join the military. But it's
dark and very depressing.
Yes.
Very dark, very depressing.
It doesn't give the image that the army is somewhere exciting to be. And second of all, I'm not certain that if you're in a combat zone, you're going to be waiting for anybody to pray. And third of all, it's clearly designed to be as emotive as possible and drive division within society rather than encourage people into the military.
So we've got a number of things. It is depressing itself, so anybody who watches it isn't going to be uplifted into the better aspects of the military, the camaraderie, the protection of people working as a team, the fact people get on and do the job without thinking what colour somebody is or what their religion is. This brings it all to the fore. As you said, Mike, the soldier sat at the back gives a little furtive glance while the man goes forward to pray, as if he is looking for some enemy. So is this realistic? Do we suddenly stop an operational patrol to pray? I don't think so. And there's almost a movement of his hand as he's on the radio that, shush, I can't speak to you on the radio because one of our platoon is going to pray. This is very dangerous manipulation of people's minds. I think this whole video is about stirring up trouble between Christians or Muslims and non-Muslims. That's what I think it's about. And of course, this has come from Capita, which has done a brilliant job of destroying Britain's ability to recruit sufficient numbers of men and women to meet military needs. So if you say this video has been produced to help drive recruiting down even further, it's spot on, which is what I think it's about. And it doesn't matter whether you are Christian or Muslim or neither. I think we need to remind ourselves that, of course, the British Ministry of Defence a few years ago voted that Satanists could be allowed to practice within the British military. That being the case, the overwhelming spiritual agenda of Britain's military must be Satanism. So if you're a Muslim, please don't be taken in by this. If you're a Christian, you certainly shouldn't be taken in. If you're undecided, just have a think about what that means, that the British government voted that satanic practices were perfectly acceptable on board British warships and hence for other military units.
What's going on with the US Navy then?
Well, they've had a few problems, particularly with the Pacific Fleet, Mike. They've bumped into a few ships. I think they've had 5 serious collisions. People have died. They're now saying that this is all a problem with training, but the US Navy Times has come up with this story in the last couple of days, which I think is also very interesting. It says Navy mistakenly tells 4,850 sailors that their orders are cancelled. The error caused messages to be sent to those sailors notifying them that their letters of intent, or LOI, had been cancelled. Now, these letters of intent are basically saying you're going to be drafted from one place to another. So something goes wrong and out go 4,850 messages which are wrong to the sailors. Have a look at what the Admiral says. He says, I want to make clear that no orders were actually cancelled. My team is reaching out to those sailors who received the erroneous notifications to ensure them that their orders remain on track. Well, the orders were cancelled because they all received letters cancelling there.
Well, was it text messages or emails or something they received?
These are actual letters that were sent out to these people.
Oh, wow.
Right? So
this is actually much worse than what happened in Hawaii over the alleged missile attack?
Well, just imagine that these men were being mobilised for a period of tension, and all of a sudden something goes wrong and their drafts are all cancelled. But it's what the Admiral says in the language, because he says he's reaching out to his team. This is newspeak language, and he is Director of Personnel Command Career Management Department. Previously, it would have been the drafting authority, but now he's reaching out. The orders were cancelled, but he says they weren't cancelled. I'm going to say, on a fairly basic analysis, I think we're beginning to see some of the reasons why the United States Navy in particular has got problems in other areas, collisions of ships.
Yeah. Right, back to the UK now and fracking. This is it's been a pretty spectacular week for the fracking campaign and the anti-fracking campaign because Third Energy has begun moving its fracking equipment back off the frack pad at Kirby Misperton. This equipment was put on the site, I think, 3 months ago now. But the campaigners, fracking campaigners, have managed to persuade the government or cause the government to really check whether Third Energy actually has any money available to it, because Third Energy apparently had not submitted any accounts to Companies House since 2016. Companies House hadn't been chasing for those accounts, it seems, but the government finally decided that really they would need some assurance as to Third Energy's financial status before they could give any approval for the fracking to actually go ahead. Third Energy seems to have now decided that it isn't going to go ahead immediately, and it started removing material off the pad, which is really good news. Now, if you want to find out more of the detail of this, join us this evening, because Ian Crane will be in the studio today. He will be have Humanity versus Insanity as usual at 7:30 p.m. tonight, and Fracking Nightmare at 9 p.m. for more on this story. Brian?
I'll just add in there that if anybody feels they'd like to donate to the excellent work that Ian Crane has been doing, go to his website. You can get in contact, or you can do that via the column. But Ian has been doing such exceptionally good work. We're now starting to see the results of what he has done, of course, and all those other wonderful people who've stood up against fracking. But everything costs money, and I think if anybody would like to donate a little bit to Ian Crane, that would be greatly appreciated. I would
also just mention his morning live streams. I believe they go out at 8:30 every morning on YouTube and on Facebook. Do look out for those, because they're excellent. Now, council tax is going to go up again, apparently. 95% of local authorities are planning council tax rises. Because of government cuts, they say, demand for services. The increase comes as 80% of councils are saying that they are in financial trouble. I find this very strange, as we'll see in a second. Now, the council taxes can be put up by 3% per year, which is in line with inflation, before a referendum is triggered, apparently. But whether that's going to be the case or not, in this case, I'm not sure. I've seen figures as much as £100 a year being put on council tax. But I ask the question because they're saying that they are having trouble with their finances. They're potentially not going to be viable in the not too distant future. But I find this a bit strange, because, or at least something must have changed since 2015, when we published this article, the Section 151 officer, Council Tax and Fraudulent Accounting. Do go to the UK Column website and read this article. There's a video clip on there as well, because, well, John Hurst, who wrote this article, he lives in the county of Powys in Wales, and he was basically pointing out the levels of funding that are in various council reserves. And he's talking about the movement in reserves statement. The statement shows the movement in the year of the different reserves held by the authority, in this case Powys, analysed into usable reserves, which are those can be used to fund expenditure or reduce local taxation, and unusable reserves. And the amount of those reserves in 2015 in Powys was usable reserves of £55.9 million, unusable reserves of £246.2 million, which gives a total reserve of £302 million. I'm not quite clear why councils should be in such difficulty, bearing in mind they're cutting services every single day, it seems.
They're not in difficulty, Mike. I think this is a massive lie which has been perpetuated over many years, that councils are short of money. If I think back to Plymouth City Council, when a lot of grant money was coming in, 49 million in one case. What happened to that money? Well, it wasn't accounted for in a single pot, so the public could actually see where that 49 million went. It was broken up into smaller sums of money and spread across all of the council's bank accounts. So, of course, it was frittered away, and the public couldn't keep track of it. So if you're as outraged as we are about the possibility of council tax going up, then get onto your local authority, find out who the Section 151 officer is, and start to really dig into the local authority accounts. You will become popular very quickly.
Yeah, this is an important point, because I mentioned Powys Council, but when the councils lost money over the Icelandic banking collapse, I put out freedom of information request to every British council about how much money they'd lost as a result of that. And in all those returns, every single council had the same pattern of usable and unusable reserves, about the same kind of scale. They do have money, and they should be using it.
They should be using it.
Now, good news, Brian. We're delighted to be able to say that we have a new ambassador for Libya. This is Frank Baker, OBE, OMG, CMG, sorry. And he is honoured to be the new British ambassador to Libya. Britain and Libya have a long history. Over the coming weeks, he's going to listen to and learn from people across Libya and discuss how Britain and Libyans can work together to achieve common interests. Boris Johnson had plenty to say as well. The UK is at the forefront of diplomatic work with the Libyan government and our international partners to help bring stability to Libya. That would be the stability that we destroyed in the first place by bombing the hell out of it. Would that be right?
We took what was a beautiful country in many areas. We bombed it to pieces. We left it in ruins. Now it's going to do as we want. Obviously, that's diplomacy in action. And we've got to remind people, of course, that Common Purpose was one of the first organisations let loose on the ruins of Libya in order to get in amongst their civil society and the remains of the Libyan government in order to reframe individuals to follow the new policy line. Now we're seeing that line come along.
Yes.
And so I've got to add, Mike, that of course Common Purpose was funded with EU money in that role.
So we're going to bring stability to Libya. This is the Libya that we bombed, as we've said, and as a result, various weapons and munitions headed out of Libya into other parts of the Middle East and created an armed conflict within Syria and other places. But look, what's going on in Libya itself, RT here reporting what they describe as shocking footage showing alleged Libyan children mimicking ISIS-style executions. This is not what children should be doing, and this is the type of thing that...
This is the type of thing damaged children do.
Well, exactly. This is the type of thing damaged children do, and that damage, of course, caused by us.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, well, I can just still see David Cameron's face pleading for the public, of course, to vote for more bombs to go down on Libya, and also the cackling between David Cameron and William Hague, who were boasting that they'd printed off, I think it was about £248 million, which was going to be transferred across to Libya. And then it emerged that this money was actually to go into the hands of organisations which were rather too closely connected to terrorist organisation. It's a very similar pattern to Syria, of course.
And in the meantime, the United States, who have no reason to be in Syria, they haven't been invited there, they've invaded. They have decided that the best thing to do is to engage with Syrian forces themselves or Syrian-backed forces. 100 pro-Syrian forces killed in an attack. This is US airstrikes killing 100 pro-Syrian fighters after an unprovoked attack on a coalition base. That's what they say, that it was unprovoked. Russia has clearly come out against what has happened. They've called it an act of aggression. Other people, Vanessa Beeley, being a bit stronger in her words about what it is. This air assault was launched after 500 Syrian fighters, backed by artillery, tanks, rockets, and mortars, targeted Syrian Democratic Forces headquarters in Deir ez-Zor, apparently, in what's being described as an unprovoked attack. Of course, not unprovoked at all. It's part of an operation that's going on, an ongoing operation. But it is something that Patrick Henningsen said was quite possibly going to happen, that the US would start engaging directly with Syrian forces, and this is a dangerous direction to be heading on. Okay. Financial news. Now, a couple of days ago, we were reporting the massive collapse in the stock markets across the world, and the following day, things reversed. Paul Craig Roberts asking a very pertinent question, another arrested equity correction, and he's drawing people's attention once again to the so-called plunge protection team. He says, did the market sneeze, cough, or was something misread and today perceived in a different light? This was written yesterday. He said, in my opinion, this is what happened. The plunge protection team, as they have done on previous equity market drops, or the Federal Reserve operating for the Working Group on Financial Markets, sent a purchase order for S&P futures to the trading floor. Hedge funds, seeing the incoming bid, front-ran the bid by stepping up and buying S&P futures. This pushed the market back up, ending the correction and preventing financial panic. And he goes on to give a bit of history on the plunge protection team and so on. Do go and have a read of this, because it is important to understand the types of shenanigans that are going on in the background to try to keep the veneer of reality in the stock markets. Of course, there isn't any really. Now, I wanted to highlight this from the Irish Examiner, because this is an update on a scandal in Ireland. It's being described as a scandal, but it is one of the many instances of mortgage fraud that has been, many people have been trying to highlight over several years or many years now. This is the tracker mortgage scandal in Ireland, where a number of banks what they were doing was encouraging people to come off what was being described as a tracker mortgage. Tracker mortgage is a mortgage where interest rates are paid by the customer, and the interest on that loan is linked to the European Central Bank's borrowing rate, which is around 1%. But it depends on what banks themselves offer. Now, but the problem was that during the financial crash of 2007-2008, when interest rates were a lot higher, interest rates at that time were 4.25% in Ireland. In 2008, they fell to 1.5% by 2011, and then to 0% by 2016. And the problem for the banks was, of course, they weren't making so much money when people weren't paying so much interest. And so they encouraged people to come off these tracker mortgages and go on to fixed rate mortgage on the understanding that once the fixed rate term was up, which is normally 2 or 3 years, they would go back onto the tracker mortgage again. What was happening was that the banks were then refusing to allow these people back onto the tracker mortgage, despite the fact that the deal was that they would. And then the banks were putting them onto either another fixed rate term or a variable rate term, or they were going onto a tracker mortgage that was on different terms to the ones that they had been on in the first place. As a result, people's mortgage repayments went up from month to month, and so far 97 homes have been lost to the banks as a result of what is more mortgage fraud. This is a huge scandal in Ireland at the moment. Michael McGrath, this article reports, who is the Fianna Fáil finance spokesman, believes that 97 homes is the tip of the iceberg. He said, given the fact that the number of impacted customers has increased dramatically to 33,700 in a few short months, it is now inevitable that the number of customers who have lost their homes as a result of being denied tracker mortgage will increase well beyond the figure of 97 currently reported by the main lenders. The fact that people lost their homes because of the actions of the banks is truly shocking, but the human impact on many other customers has been profound also. So this issue needs to be dealt with, Brian.
There's more and more things going on in the background, Mike. We've been told a few days ago that there's been a group action against Lloyds in relation to Lloyds Bank in relation to mortgages. This is what I understand, and that as a result of excellent work through that group action, Lloyds wants to reach an out-of-court settlement. I understand there's effectively a media or a gagging order on the people involved in that group action, but I have to use the expression, the source that alerted us to this says that the event is real. As a precedence case, it's got huge implications across the mortgage industry, and we're now starting to see what toxic debt is really about, and those bundled mortgages which are simply sold on once you've signed the papers. A lot of this is coming out over social media. Of course, the mainstream papers don't talk about it.
Right.
Freemasons.
Yes.
A bit sad.
They are very sad. They're very sad. The BBC has covered this. All the mainstream media have covered this for some reason. The BBC's headline is Freemasons Call for End to Discrimination of Members. And this is the United Grand Lodge of England are complaining because apparently its members are being undeservedly stigmatised. I'm really sorry for them. They've written to the Equality and Human Rights Commission because of the bullying and stigmatisation of their members. They put adverts in the Times, the Daily Telegraph and the Guardian today, and they're complaining of gross misrepresentation of their members. The advertisement, it comes under the headline, Enough is Enough. Because apparently the Freemasons do just such sterling work for charity. For example, apparently they raised £33 million, £33 million last year, Brian. £33 million, that's 200,000 Freemasons in the UK, £33 million, that's £165 each. That's pretty generous of them, isn't it?
Well, it is, but I think we have to say, Mike, some interesting stuff really going on here, because we know that there's effectively a war been going on between the Freemasons and Common Purpose. The Freemasons within the body of the church, I excuse that expression, simply didn't realise what was happening as the Common Purpose network started to invade particularly local government structures within cities. So this has caused the Freemasons big problems. But as with everything, do all the Freemasons know what is being done in their name by all the lodges, or indeed at higher level? We've got to say they don't. Also, if you're building a dictatorship, and I'm happy to say I believe that the British government is building a dictatorship very quickly at the moment, you can't have secret societies. So the Freemasons, I think, are in a very interesting position, because either they're going to understand what is actually being done around them and deal with it, or I think they're going to be squashed as an organisation. I do accept that people higher up the Masonic Order know full well what's happening, because they're part of the people who created Common Purpose in the first place.
Well, look, this issue of transparency is the key, because again, they're claiming that they're not a secret society, and yet we heard just this week of the 4 Masonic lodges in Westminster at Parliament. The spokesman for the Grand Lodge of the United Grand Lodge of England has agreed that those lodges exist, but he says that none of the members of those lodges were MPs or political journalists. But we still don't know who the members are, no. So they still won't be transparent on who their membership is, and of course members are discouraged from saying that they are Freemasons. So in that sense, it is a secret society.
Yeah.
And we're just going to end on a light-hearted note. We mentioned a few days ago that Matt Hancock, the ex-digital minister upgraded to Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, had produced his own app for your mobile phone or tablet. It's called Matt Hancock. And he was asked about this in Parliament today, because he was asked about potential data protection breaches, because it appears that the Matt Hancock app accesses personal information, for example photographs, without permission. But he said, look, it's no problem. He's done all his work. He's registered with the Data Commissioner and so on. But he said he's delighted with the response to Matt Hancock. So I just wanted to end on that piece of good news.
Well, as the state of government at the moment, we can't run the country, but we can play around with a personalised app. Brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah.
We better end there. The clock is ticking. We're going to say thank you very much to everybody that's joined UK Column News today. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to UK Column. We can only do what we do with your financial support. You can also make a donation, of course. I'll just give you a reminder, Ian Crane could also do with a little bit of financial support at the moment. So if you can help on both fronts, that would be really excellent.
Can I just say welcome to a couple of new names in the chat box today. Good to see some new people coming.
Excellent. And as always, a big thank you to our overseas viewers. We do think about you. Our news it is predominantly UK, but we're hoping in the future to get more varied overseas news in, and maybe we can get some of the local news, for example, in the States, where it's quite clear our audience is growing. Thanks very much for joining us. Bye-bye. Bye.